I'm the son of a shepherd. When I was a child, I would look after the livestock after school. Being a shepherd is my whole life. I don't know what else to do.
For how long will the proud African shepherds be able to continue traveling freely in the vast plains of the continent and lead their herds from one watering hole to another in search of rich pastures? Over the centuries, these shepherds, whether Fulani or Arab, have succeeded in adapting their zebus and sheep to inhospitable and arid regions, and also in developing a form of flexible and independent stock breeding. But today, in our changing world, what is to become of them? The effects of globalization is felt even as far as the most rural and isolated regions of Africa, threatening ancestral cultures that have been long protected. The future of these independent and free-moving nomads is under question in a world where the market economy makes the law, a world where climatic changes bring about continuous droughts, a world where dramatic demographic increases require African states to supply meat to more and more demanding urban populations, a world where contemplation, freedom of movement, and free speech seem to no longer have a place.
À Yoff, on a trop de difficultés, trop de difficultés. Hassan a fait 60 ans, moi j'ai fait 35 ans. En ce moment, avant c'était très bien parce qu'il y avait assez de pâturage. Mais actuellement, nous n'avons pas de pâturage. Les routes sont barrées, nous n'avons pas de quoi faire boire nos troupeaux.
Whereas the demand for meat increases, the situation has worsened for the shepherds. The first ones affected are the Fulani, a large ethnic group originally from Nubia. Millions of these seasonal migrating shepherds still provide most of the red meat consumed in Central and Western Africa. But their freedom of movement is being increasingly reduced, confronting them with enormous challenges and an uncertain future.
In the Sahel region, the cattle breeders rely 95% on the pasture. A pasture which is not very productive, given it only provides 350 to 700 pounds of hay per acre. Moreover, it's suffering from climatic hazards. So it's really important to maintain seasonal migration, which is the way for finding grass where it's there one year and not the other. This migration is a method to make up for the droughts and other risks associated with cattle breeding. And in most dry Sahelian zones, these shepherds are the only ones who can sustain the land, which can only be enhanced by four-legged animals who go looking for food and come back, eventually transforming into the meat that's sold. We can't do farming without falling into problems of irrigation, and we can't make oases everywhere. So animal production is the only thing that can sustain these marginal zones.
In Dakar, a research station on dry zone livestock breeding was created almost a decade ago. Covering the territory from Senegal to Chad, the research team do their best to make African states understand the benefits of seasonal migration for traditional cattle raising.
Economically and environmentally, I don't think there are any other cattle raising systems that could produce any better than what these shepherds do. The only thing to do taking into account the government's objectives and policies and the need to increase meat production, is to support this type of cattle raising in the same way African nations already support other agricultural systems.
In Chad, as soon as the wet season starts, the nomadic shepherds migrate to the vast northern plains which get covered by grass due to the rain. This is the situation in the Musoro area. However, when the dry season reclaims its territory in the fall, shepherds are forced to retreat towards the south in search of new pastures. The nomadic shepherds begin a long migration of almost 300 miles, passing by Lake Chad, then following the Shari and Logone rivers to the south of the city of Jamina. Every day, the Logone riverbanks witness an impressive spectacle. Dozens of Fulani and Arabic shepherds bringing their zebus, camels, goats, as well as their sheep to drink from the river. Like many families of nomadic shepherds, Alaji Chama and his kin have established their camp at Mabulum, an area coveted by many farmers and migrating shepherds, ideally situated less than 2 miles from the river. Here, like in most areas of the country, pasture areas and migration roads set up centuries ago and dedicated to nomadic shepherds are hardly respected anymore by the rest of the population. Alaji Chama is Fulani. Like all shepherds of his ethnicity, he does not know the exact number of cattle he has, but he knows each one by their name. The second one of them disappears, he senses it and knows which one. The cattle are the Fulani's reason for living. The milk provided by their cows accounts for a large part of their diet.
In the dry season, we need to have easier access to pastures and ponds. We've got all sorts of problems going to and from places and bringing our animals to watering holes. The problem is all these farm fields. If the farmers do their farming here, we have to go further out where there aren't any crops. There's no space for us here anymore. That's our biggest problem. Everybody is farming in this area. I understand how the world works today. If you don't have your own land, you'll be in a bind tomorrow. That's what I predict. That's why we have to buy land everywhere and whenever possible.
لأنه هم دولة نيجليجي هم
This country forgot about its shepherds. In Chad, there's no law that organizes seasonal migration. There's only one law that dates from October the 31st, 1959. It's very old and maladjusted to today's conditions. The population and cattle numbers have increased. The expansion of the desert has also instigated other shepherds to enter zones otherwise preserved for the Fulani. The old migration roads are lost. The new roads turned into farmland. That's how the conflicts between the shepherds and the farmers began. The shortage of pasture and water to feed the livestock is forcing shepherds to set up camp around the villages. The state should drill wells far from the villages and preserve pasture zones. But since shepherds are forced to use the village wells, it's creating problems. Often, the villagers think they won't have enough water if the shepherds' animals keep helping themselves to it, and decide they should have to pay for it if they want some. Sometimes that provokes fights, which can even result in deaths. And by that, I mean the deaths of the migrating shepherds. The local authorities make it worse by always treating the farmers as victims and the shepherds as perpetrators. The shepherds face many difficulties in general, but for the Fulani, it's even worse. Because anywhere they set up their camp, they have no rights. They're extorted by local town authorities, who fine them for no reason. Some of them have even been killed, while others have lost their livestock.
It happens all the time when fighting with the farmers. Not only do we have to pay 2,000 francs in fines, but we have to pay 5,000 or 10,000 more to the authorities. The farmer takes the money, and so do the authorities. For the farmers, though, it's okay because they're the ones affected by the damages. It's the extra payment to the authorities that bothers us. We don't understand why we're being fined by them. It's beyond us.
Every Friday, the Fulani shepherds from the Mabulum area gather to pray and share news. Today, delegates from their nomad organization have arrived, allowing the shepherds the opportunity to express their grievances. For several years in Chad, as in all countries of the Sahelian region, the Fulani shepherds have formed organizations to defend their rights.
enen leydi caadi enen duroɓe enen en ngala belɗum ko buda ngaman en desama fayde wala demo wala laamu to ɗen a yottike gorere tagu sayi a ɗo o ɗum inaare am ɗo o ɗum inaare am anani yo eɗen godi jawdi ɗoygol gol Allah magol wari en anani ɗe barama e ngala to degotoɗen ɗum adowa kiskir guda ɗum resa ngel joge duuɓi daga mortaki fa dabbune yawta nagge wote to memingel ɗum ñama neɗɗo 20, 30, 40.
Jawdi élevage ɗi ɗon mari barki idi ɗon kala gouvernement e ɗon watta 60 millions ƴawɗo ɓe taxe hakko wala dema wattata woodi ɓiɓɓe duroɓe kas élevage amma wala musa ada gadda ɗum huno dukkete kay joɗɗine les na waɗ wala ɗum woodi ɗum waray amma ɗum wangata sam ɗum wangata ha jomum nayi seyni o nana sey ɗum waɗa hawrinde bani hi goɗɗo ministre jo ha Tchad o toure be ɗereji o yaha hawtu himɓe o wara o rara himɓe o o ada massa makko o yaɓa ɗereji o wiya nasara en kugal timmi wala gaɗuki ko goti ɓe nanga séminaire ha jamena ɓe ñama ceede.
These development schemes fail, since none of the key players are consulted. They're planned in ministries, and once implemented on the ground, they don't work, because they didn't get the opinions of those mainly involved, neither the shepherds nor the farmers. A commission aimed at solving the shepherd-farmer conflict was organized under the guidance of a national mediator. The bill they proposed made us so annoyed that we left the room, since these laws were strictly repressive without any benefit for the shepherd.
Hala wiiɓe nanga gujjo ta yarimo jango ko dilla ma jaha ton kawrama o moya anani dalime ittike ay dalime ittaki dama ɓeyduɗa dalime yo gaɗeɗa anani gujjo yotto waɗuma jango hakkuma ƴiwa ɓawa yowanma ɓuuri ɗum ko gujjo waɗanma anani ɗum fu ɗum dalime dow meɗen yo hande bo ladde matorike en ngala enen ni hande belɗum jon jawdi wala belɗum enen jeeyi jawdi amma en ngala belɗum en maɗike ko gangare ɓuura en jonta dottiɓe ɓe to ɓe ngoni ɗanotoɗo koko oto wala gam holugo huyɓe to gujjo wari nder durayɓe ɓen jemma ɓen o wari go'oto o doggi kala haala makko metatake kanko o daɗi on gujjo warimo o maayi ma abiti gujjo waati to ɗum pullo kam nde laato to ɗum gujjo on kanko fiɗa hakuma wara laña to pullo woni pat heɓa ɓe nanga ɓe kefti barɗo ɓe keftama kamɓe yoɓoɓe tan diyare min mi'i to boddi wara ɗum waɗani mi diyare pullo waɗi diyare nayi bari ɓe jaaɓini hakuma wari waɗani diyare.
With the increasing number of armed conflicts, a new threat has emerged for the nomadic shepherds.
Ils sont pulvérisés dans les savanes.
The shepherds are very spread out in the savannah, so they are vulnerable and isolated. It's not only difficult for them to sell their cattle and their milk, but they're also accessible to bandits who have been multiplying. That was the case in Cameroon, but the problem has been resolved. It hasn't in Central African Republic, neither in Chad nor Sudan. So there's organized crime and crooks with assault rifles who descend upon small camps, mistreat the people there, and force them to go and sell their cattle. Then they wait for the money to come back. According to most recent news, there were almost 30,000 shepherds who fled the Central African Republic to evade these raids. A large part of the state isn't controlled by law enforcement. So for a while, the shepherds organized the protection of archers, but they weren't strong enough to go against rifles. There were almost 30,000 Fulani and Bororos out of 200,000 who fled to Cameroon, where there was better safety.
Senegal is a country where peace prevails. The Furlough district, once a seasonal migration zone and backup shelter for the Fulani shepherds, witnessed a major evolution. In the 1950s, the government assured water access year-round, encouraging the shepherds and their families to settle in and regroup into tiny villages close to ponds and permanent watering holes. Yet for many, peace and tranquility does not necessarily mean safety for the animals.
In the past, you could leave your herd to stray. You could leave them alone for 10 days and nobody would touch them. Now, for the shepherds in Senegal, if you leave for work, you come back to find your cattle stolen, which we find very strange. I live in Kajali. My grandfather, my father, and I were all born here. This is where I'm from. I'm a shepherd, and I also cultivate the land. But above all, I'm a shepherd. I'm a shepherd with a lot of cattle. 3 months ago, during the rainy season, everything was good since there was food and water for the cattle. But now, after these 3 months, we have to bring the cattle to the well. If we could have the water brought to us, instead of having to bring the herd 6 miles to drink, it would be much better. We would be rid of our greatest problem. It's a fact that we need help in developing cattle raising in Senegal in order to produce meat and milk. But we can't produce enough because of the droughts. There's no more water or ponds to drink from, nor any pastures. And just because we have herds doesn't mean we're rich enough to get through this. The shepherds don't have the means anymore to get by.
Once the 3-month rainy season is over, the cattle have to travel long distances to find water. That's why they lose weight and only drink once a day. In these conditions, the cattle can't gain weight, nor reproduce correctly. My name is Mahamka. I was born here in Tiarme, and I am president of the Rural Committee. I grew up in a family of shepherds. I'm the son of a shepherd. We need help as much as the farmers. We need equipment in order to work. Water jugs can't cost 500 francs. We need to be able to access water, like the farmers can. If we had tank trucks, we could bring back water. even from far away.
Before the rivers dried up, we had big, fat cattle. They were well fed. They were eating, they were drinking, they were resting. And from one town to another, we could always find food and water. The wells were full, and if not, you only had to dig to find water. Now, the cattle don't have water, and the cows can't feed their young ones correctly. In the past, the vets would come to our shepherds. They would give the sick cattle some shots, and these cattle were cured. That's how it went. The number of vaccines they gave you then for 2 or 3 animals must now be enough to vaccinate 500 animals today.
The states traditionally organized vaccination drives, debugging, and animal baths for fighting against ticks, since ticks transmit fatal diseases. So before, it was the state who was in charge of coordinating and financing animal health. Then there was a global change in strategy with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They asked that the producers cover the total cost of animal health. So there was a breakup of the organization system, and the national schemes of animal health were privatized. Animal health is no longer secured in these vast pastoral zones where the human and animal density is very small. You understand that a vet's not going to go and live in a place where there's only 3 or 4 people per square kilometer and a few cattle.
The Fulani possess ancestral knowledge crucial today for cattle raising. They know where to find pastures that favor the growth of the animals, how to fend off their parasites, and heal their infections. In absence of serious vet support, they have no choice but to practice traditional bush medicine, which Alaji Chama demonstrates today. With his heated blade, he makes incisions on a cattle suffering from arthritis.
We still treat the animals in a traditional manner, with fire. But for certain illnesses, we would need a vet. Today, those doctors who would come and see our cattle don't do any good. They only cause more damage.
The Fulani shepherds are hardly better off when it comes to their own health, the health of their family, and their children's education. Medical dispensaries are often far from their bush camps, and the schools are in no hurry to welcome children from families who move constantly. The shepherds generally suffer institutional and political marginalization. In cattle raising, the big problem is the collective action. The existing unions and organizations were created by the state. It wasn't the shepherds' initiative to form themselves into groups and fight for their own issues. Most of these organizations are shadow organizations. They're people who are Fulani, but are not actually shepherds. And that's a major problem in Senegal. The assumption that you're a shepherd just because you're Fulani.
The organizations that are supposed to represent us are not managed by shepherds. They're just businessmen who are neither shepherds nor farmers. Honestly, do they know the reality and the problems that we are faced with? Are the technical advisors and cattle raising specialists really doing their job? Is it the state of Senegal who is neglecting the shepherds? That's what we can ask ourselves. Is the state misinformed, or are they just ignoring our problems knowingly?
The traditional shepherds are accused of managing their livestock unproductively and withholding their worth. By refusing to sell their cattle, the shepherds would interrupt the economic development. Although specialists have proved that this management is productive in a way that allows the shepherds to adapt to sanitary and economic risks, these false accusations are hard to be dismissed.
During my first field visit, I was a little surprised. You'd think you were in front of a marginal activity of ancient times, remnants of ethnic traditions affected by globalization in the 21st century. We're aware that we're in a world full of incertitude and faced with a lot of problems, and we see them. We feel the dryness of this environment, and we finally realize that these shepherds are succeeding in developing economic behaviors best suited for the environment they're in.
دور 45 بقر
انا كل بيتها 30
30 ده البركه اخوي
30 ده عدل
بقر ده معنا 30 البركه
سمي 30 وتنين بيتها
البركه
انت قصرت عليه كم؟
جيب 40
40 ما يجي
خليتها 5 ده جيب 40 بيتا ليك 40 بقر
يو قصر عليه شغل شيء خلاص كمل
انا ده خليتها ليك 40 ده البيتا ده جيب 40
سمي 30 و8 انا بيتا انقص عليه شغل شيء انقص عليه
خليتها ليك الف واحد
خليت الف واحد سمي انا كله خليت عليك الف واحد نسلك 30 و8 نجيب قرص سلمت عليه سي
خلاص قال جيب قرص
يوا ده لا ده هناك
يو
قرص ده مباكر
زين
انا نجي انت قرص هناك ونكربه بقره انا
يوم المتى
ما عليهم الهرباء مباكر خميس جمعة صبر نجيب قرص هناك نكربه بقره انا نمشي انا
يو انت 200 لعاده
انت 200 لعاده
يو ما شاء الله
تلقى 200 لعاده
ما شاء الله ما شاء الله
شكرا الله يبارك الله يسوي بركه امين الله يبارك الله يسوي مرحبا سنو ما شاء الله سنو بابا شكرا
كنم بقر كله رب سوا
We sell cattle to buy food, to buy clothes, and also to buy medicine. Medicine to heal the cattle. We do nothing but livestock breeding. Farming the land is not our profession. It's only by selling the cattle that we can provide for ourselves.
The market is the biggest threat today to the future of traditional cattle raising. During the dry season, Sahelian shepherds are forced to sell their cattle to buy large quantities of cereal necessary to feed their families. Yet they increasingly find themselves faced with speculation from unscrupulous merchants.
During the hunger gap, which is just before the harvest, when people have to buy food after they clean out their food storage, the merchants increase the cereal price for a 200-pound bag from 7,000 francs to 12,000, 20,000, up to 40,000. People have to eat, so they're forced to sell their cattle to buy the cereal, which has become more and more expensive. But since everybody's in the same situation, all the shepherds bring their cattle to the local market at the same time, which makes their worth go down. So one cow worth 100,000 francs is negotiated for 80 or 60,000 francs. So on one side you have cereal inflating from 7,000 to 20,000 on average, and at the same time you have cattle selling for 60,000 instead of 100,000 during this critical period. So it's this double phenomenon that is subjecting them to marketplace oppression.
In Senegal, what hurts us is that the farmers are being helped out more than we are. When winter approaches, the farmers are loaned money to sow the land. For a sack of grain that costs 50,000 francs, they get it for half price. For us shepherds, a sack of food for cattle goes from 8,000 to 10,000 francs, and not a penny less. And that hurts us because in order to buy it, we would have to borrow from the bank. And even 500 zebu is not good enough collateral for the bank. That's the way it is in Senegal. People have to know that the government is letting us down.
Tang boobu ak tey du benn maa ngi tang boobu mu ngi sax ngooñ sax ñu ngi jar fii fukk ak juróom maas dem ba ci fanweer léegi mu ngi ci 3,500 ma 4,000 xam nga bokkuñ loolu moo ko waral ko aduna yàlla nit yi ñoo ko yokku marchandise moo ko yokku yokka bii nag ñoo yëpp xam na ko bu ñu ko taxaw mote mu seere noonu jënd jox leen nu lekk jox leen nu ndox jox leen nu kooraay jox leen nu élément jox leen ripaas jox leen lépp ci poos rek la ñu dundal li ci def nag wàllu élevage dimbal temps dañ ko dimbal temps élevage dañ ko dimbal
min jeehi min ponde hay so tawi ministre de élevage
Since a ministry for cattle raising was created, there should have been changes.
mais ha joni min kaɓama ha min
But up until today, none of the problems regarding cattle raising have been resolved. Absolutely nothing.
min mbi noon que laamu ngu
They said they were going to help the shepherds because they know the potential that comes from cattle raising. But in the end, they're only interested in their own personal ambition. There's a conflict of interest and a conflict of objectives. What interests the state is the supply of meat products and milk to urban areas, whereas the Fulani don't see themselves as the providers of the meat. They're cattle breeders with a particular relation with the animals and a particular way of managing them. It feels like there's been a misunderstanding right from the start.
The government is not helping us. If they wanted to help us, they would have stopped other shepherds from entering the country. They're killing our production. These shepherds come from Mauritania, they come from Gambia, they come from Mali. They sell their sheep and go back to their countries with the money. That bothers me. The Gambian border is less than 200 miles away, and you can't even bring over a half pound of sugar without paying tax. The neighbouring frontiers led entire herds into Senegal, while ours aren't even able to leave the country. Why is that?
The last threat comes from the subsidized meat stockpiles imported from Europe and Latin America. 50,000 tons were imported at the end of the 80s, and numbers today reach more than 200,000 tons, allowing for meat to be sold at a lower price.
To feed their urban population, the states need meat for the least expensive price possible, so it's endangering their animal production sector. On the African coast markets, the Sahelians bring meat selling at 600 francs, while the Europeans sell it for 400 francs. So when the housewife in Abidjan opens up her wallet to see that she doesn't have a lot of money, what is she going to choose? The frozen meat selling at 400, which is acceptable meat with 30% fat, or zebu meat that she's used to buying at 600? Well, she's going to buy the meat that costs 400. So the Sahelian shepherds are forced to lower the price of their meat if they want to sell it. But because they still need to buy a ton of cereal, they're then forced to sell some additional cattle.
لا لا بقر ده عنده كله يعرفوا كله دولة كهرباء قريب 60 سنة دولة كهرباء بقر ده ولا 70 سنة ما نعرف كهرباء ده ما لهم بترول ده مرق بس بقر ما عندهم فوق حاجة خليها حكومة يورينا
اول شغل بيرفعها ده اللي الترانسبور والبهايم هسه بقت الدولة بترولية ونحن منضغطين تعبانين حالتنا بالبلاء حتى لقمة العيش بقت لنا صعبة.
For a long time, a cattle-raising country like Chad had provided its neighbouring countries with fresh meat. In the 1950s, a large slaughterhouse was constructed in Jamina for exporting meat to many countries, from Benin to Saudi Arabia. With the increase of transport costs and competition of imported meat from Europe and Latin America, the Chadian exports have suffered a heavy blow. The Jamina slaughterhouse no longer runs at full capacity, leaving one less market for the African shepherds.
In the 1970s, we exported more than 11,000 tons of fresh meat to the Congo. That's the two Congos, Republic of Congo and Zaire. And it worked out very well. Today, there are people who bring their frozen meat from Argentina and elsewhere, and they come here to Zaire with a lower price. So when you turn up with your meat from Chad with a price fixed at no less than 2,000 francs a kilo, it doesn't work. In today's world, especially Africa, it's about quantity instead of quality. Those who migrate seasonally have beautiful cattle in comparison to those who stay where they are. Even at the market, they're sold at a premium. Cattle raising, in theory, could replace oil production if we took good care of it. I'm sure of it. It's just as profitable as oil. The Chadian livestock is a gift, and it's not ready to disappear.
At an international level, we Europeans are partially responsible for some of the local problems, especially the French, considering meat exported from Europe in the 90s was 42% French. From an international standpoint, there are about 140,000 or 200,000 tons of subsidized meat currently arriving to the countries on the coast. So we Europeans are partially responsible for the impoverishment of Sahelian livestock shepherds. But since they're not properly organized, we don't learn about their difficulties. The cotton producers did protest their problems at the WTO rounds of negotiations, while the International Organization for Shepherds was just getting established. But right now, it's just an empty shell. It doesn't have the same strengths as the African cotton planters or its organizations. But it has to get there if they want to start negotiations at the WTO. This whole situation is not right. Without a change in international agreements regarding the meat problem, I fear the shepherds will become so poor it will reach the point where they'll have to sell all their cattle and take up fishing. Just like I saw in the Central African Republic. I saw a Bororo shepherd who didn't have any more animals and who has to fish for a living. It would be the end of an incredible way of life and a people with so many great skills.
With the possible disappearance of the Fulani shepherds, isn't it time to rethink our developing models? In a time of climatic hazards and economic uncertainty, their mobile, flexible way of life and their respect for the fragile balance between man and nature is full of lessons. If supported and improved, the traditional cattle-raising system of the Fulani shepherds may show us the way in which we could organise our world tomorrow to face our own challenges.